Hello and welcome to Taking Liberties episode 13, the very 13th episode of season 5. My name is Lee, I'm in Western Australia. I'm joined by Vikas,
Hello.
and we're going to have a very merry jaunt through police brutality and idiotic Greens policies on banking. So let's begin.
By idiot policies by Green's idiot policies, we mean every Green
Yeah,
policy
it's true.
on banking.
It's almost redundant to say idiotic policies and Greens together in the same sentence, but you know, you gotta be specific these days. There's in the last week or so there was a very shocking video of a disability pensioner being brutally bashed by cops and pepper sprayed. And that footage was released to the public, and there's been a great outcry against that kind of thing. So yeah, we're going to talk about that. I'm going to be writing an article for Liberty Works on police brutality, so that's hopefully going to be
Police brutality in general. That's going to be interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, we've seen a number. So there was a case, not that. So there was in Fremantle in Western Australia where a guy was tasered because he wouldn't get out of his car. The cop was just being completely unreasonable, and the crime commission here in Western Australia said that it was unlawful. There's a case in Queensland where a Gold Coast, like a sergeant on the Gold Coast, was charged for leaking footage of cops bashing prisoners, or being like I think beating prisoners. So yeah, there's a little bit of it going on. Obviously, it hasn't got quite the same shocking nature because it's not like the US where you're seeing cops shooting people.
Yeah.
But certainly, it's a thing. It's a real thing.
So the thing is, I actually spoke about this with some mates of mine who aren't libertarians, and I remember the discussion basically going along the lines of, so cops are brutes, right, effectively. And I know that sounds like a rude thing to say, and it kind of is, but at the same, because these people are meant to protect and serve and all these other things. But that's all the spin of it, right? Like, when you get down to it, ultimately, their position is to enforce the legitimate monopoly on force that the government has. It's the definition of a state. But the point is, and I always go like, it's not that the cops have to be this way, right? They are this way for a number of reasons. Yes. The first being that because we live in a social democracy, right? We don't basically have a choice in how they get to treat us, right?
Yeah.
50, we'll have a vote generally on policies dealing with the police, and the minority loses, and the minority has to put up with whatever the majority has dictated the police should operate as. Now, my point is, the police as a force in general don't actually care very much about how the community feels about how they're being policed, right? Yep. They're there to police how whatever the contract holder, which is the government effectively of the day, sees their role as. And in a very, very sort of 6 degrees of separation kind of way, we have a say in how that actually eventuates. So, which is why police, policies change very slowly. It's why police are often enthroned. I guess the concept is basically entrenched or whatever. Like they have a deep culture that's perpetuated by the police union.
Yes.
And it doesn't help that both the left and the right are both very pro-police. One comes at it from the union side, and the other comes at it from the more law and order authoritarian bent. But the point is basically, the police forces of most places just have no incentive structure to change. And my friends basically said, so what, you think you should have a privatized police force? And I said, I think if you take a look at the way security tends to operate, which is completely, a private endeavor, most people don't like security guards, but at the same time, they would say that security guards treat them way better than police officers do.
And also, presumably, security guards wouldn't get the benefit of the doubt if something were to go wrong. Like if So if you look at the footage of this gentleman being bashed in the pensioner being bashed. I'm trying to find his name.
Yeah.
Like it's essentially the situation was that, this guy's on going off his pain medication. And his carers were concerned for his welfare, so they called the cops, right? Or they called the authorities, and the cops show up, and they are told that he could be aggressive and he could want them to shoot. So there's 6 of them. They basically yell at him to open the door, or they're going to rip it down. He opens the door. They basically drag him out and hit him with like batons and pin him to the ground. And this is a disability pension. Like the guy's old, and they capture spray in the process. Yeah. And then as he's handcuffed, they spray him in the face with his own hose. And the whole attitude
to wash off the
completely there's not at any point is there any kind of respect given to this guy. So, if it wasn't for on video, I suspect the police would get the benefit of the doubt, because they initially said that he was aggressive. He came out with his fists up. So that was, that's obviously been contradicted by this footage, which shows them reaching in and grabbing him and dragging him out, and him saying at the door, "I don't want you to come in. Leave me alone." So he wanted to be left alone. They were going to come in no matter what. And I suspect if there was no CCTV of this guy, because the guy actually had his own CCTV on his house, there'd be a lot more skepticism towards his claims of brutality. But we have seen the footage, and it's undeniable, so people don't deny it. But I don't think security guards in general would be treated with that much deference if the general population had the same relationship. If they did the same similar sorts of things.
Yeah. So the other thing is, the interesting part about this entire story is the man suffers from mental illness, right? And his psychiatrist basically called the police saying, "I'm concerned about the guy's mental health. Can you please go in and check on him?" Right?
Yep.
So I'm just like, what kind of signal does this send out? Like, what kind of signal are the police actually sending out when they perform these kind of actions? It's just like, okay, so you called us to help a friend of yours, right? We're just going to beat him up.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you think about the carers, so the carers, you have to think, would have they wanted this to happen to him?
No.
When they called cops? Of course not. And so, I mean, libertarians often talk about, don't call the cops unless you expect someone to be shot and to die. But this is a very real instance of that situation, of how the police can escalate these situations, and there's no real accountability that's going to be had. Like, I suspect...
Which is... but by the way, that's a general advice from libertarians everywhere around the world. We all say the same thing. It's just like, if you truly want to help someone, call the ambos, or failing that, the firemen. Right? Your police you should only be calling the cops if you need someone killed.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, when it genuinely is life or death. And it's entirely possible that in the process of putting in those calls, the cops went instead of the ambos. So that's, it's one of those things of when interacting with the state, you got to be careful who actually answers the call for what you're requesting. But I mean, there's 2 aspects to the accountability thing, which I think is cause for concern. So the first thing is that how many cops actually lose their jobs? So in the case of Queensland on the Gold Coast, this guy leaks footage, this sergeant, he leaks footage, former sergeant now, leaks footage of cops beating a handcuffed prisoner. So someone in their custody, they show him beating him. And the guy
instead of them losing the job, the guy who leaked it loses the job.
Exactly. Okay. He loses his job. He's charged. He's fortunately found not guilty, but nevertheless he lost his job, and I presume he'll never be able to be a cop again. And to my knowledge, at this stage, there's been no charges against anybody who's been accused of brutality in that cop shop. It's very early stages still with this stuff going on in Victoria with the disability pensioner, because the footage came out a couple of days ago, so there's still inquiries and all this kind of stuff. But I mean, the reality is how many of these cops who get busted lose their jobs? And secondly, there's lots of this stuff that's going to go on that people are going to make accusations, and there's not footage. That's the thing. So in all these instances, the pensioner, the Gold Coast, and this one I mentioned before in Fremantle, people were filming it, or it was filmed by CCTV, and that was released to the public. But what happens in instances where there is no footage? How many cops who are accused of brutality are going to lose their jobs when you can't demonstrate to the public that this is clearly, because that's it. It's public pressure that brings these change. Might get these cops fired, maybe, but it's not internal.
Actually,
pressure.
it doesn't. Actually, it doesn't. And I was going to say, and not just to that case, but the case we didn't talk about was the Brazilian student who was high on drugs, right, and came into a store, right. He was fucking tased. He was tased a large number of times to the point where he was murdered. None of the cops on that one were removed from the service.
Yeah.
Absolutely none of them. And the coroner found, the cause of death was excessive tasing.
Yeah.
It resulted in a cash payout to the. Our courts basically ruled it was it wasn't appropriate standard. It was against contravenous to the code of the police, contravenous to police procedures, right? And the family got a massive payout. And simultaneously, none of these cops got. Despite the fact that they said didn't follow procedure, none of them were reprimanded or even removed. They probably experienced a slight road bump on their way up in their careers.
Well, maybe, yeah.
Yeah, but that's about it.
Actually, that brings into like a separate thing of, that you can't sue the police involved. So that's the other thing is, it's a shame that Zeev's not here because I would have been really interested to hear what he had to say about specifically this. But certainly, as far as I know here, it's true of the US. Well, what's true in the US is true here as well, which is you have this doctrine called qualified immunity, where essentially cops can't be sued, prosecutors can't be sued. Anybody who's involved.
Can't be sued when in line of the work that they're doing.
Yeah, so it's
very specific to
difficult. Certainly, from what I know of the US, essentially, the likelihood of you being able to personally sue the cop that kills you or beats you, or not that you'd sue somebody when you're dead, but the family suing somebody who's killed, or if you are brutalized, the chances of you actually being able to sue that cop specifically is basically zero. It's possible. It's very difficult. I don't know what the legal standard in Australia is. I suspect it's going to be pretty close of some sort of immunity from legal, from civil cases, and in that regard, it means that, say you or I bash somebody, if somebody comes onto our property and we just savagely attack them,
So it's gonna be 0%, but not because of that. So there's a concept called professional courtesy, and it's exercised by effectively all members of the military and anyone working in law enforcement. You see it all the time. The point is, if you've got a military badge, for example, the cops tend to let you go if they catch you doing something.
Sure.
Similarly, if you've got a cop ID, same thing. And that's true internationally as it is here. Even when that law exists, you'll find it's very unlikely for a prosecutor to go after the cop, even though they've got a case and the person's lost their immunity.
So
it's very, very rare.
So yes, I think that's true, but I think because one of my concerns about this whole thing is there's no direct accountability to the person who was injured. So, you think about the case of the Palm Island, Cameron Doomadgee's death, where they charged the sergeant, I can't remember his name. This is 2004. He was criminally charged and found not guilty, which is what brought on all the riots. But I'm less concerned about the people being held accountable to the state. I'm more concerned about people being held accountable to the individual that was harmed. Because if a cop bashes me and then goes to prison, that doesn't help me at all. It is justice to an extent, but really, he should be held accountable to me directly, and I should be able to sue him to get compensation. So he suffers he compensates me directly, as opposed to what really happens, which is I sue the state, and the state then compensates me from taxpayer money.
Yeah.
So I guess that's the distinction I'm making, and why I think it's an issue that we can't sue cops directly, or prosecutors for that matter, or judges for that matter. Or politicians, for that matter. We should, that lack of accountability means that they can act with impunity because it's not them who pay out the money for the settlement, or whatever it is.
So, and this is why I'm a major proponent of privatized police forces and privatized militaries.
Sure.
So, one of the big things, and I know I'm about to bring up Blackwater and XE. So, one of the big things that Blackwater and XE spruik to people, right? Especially military contractors around the world, is they go as a institution that provides mercenaries, right? They have had fewer instances where their men have been caught raping, right, raping, basically raping or basically committing war crimes,
Yep.
right? Than the U.S. military, and they point this out as a matter of pride in their company. And they go like, we've had fewer instances per capita and as a number than the U.S. military.
Yep.
And they said, and when people do bring cases, because they don't, with the exception of what happened in Iraq, they go like, with the exception of Iraq, they don't have legal immunity,
Yep.
right? So they can actually be held accountable.
Which is one of the reasons why U.S. troops left, is because the Iraqi government was going to grant the troops immunity. Like, that's essentially the negotiations that Bush was having with the government at the time in Iraq, is he wanted immunity for his soldiers, and when they wouldn't offer it, they're like, well, we're going to leave then.
Yeah. So like, this is actually something mercenary forces around the world use as a point of saying, you can actually bring us in because we work under your laws, right? Yep. So if you want to give us immunity, that's good, right? But ultimately, we work under your laws, right? So if you need to imprison us, right, there's no one who can protect us, right? So we operate under whatever restrictions you put around. Now, of course, the problem is, right, that's usually then used, that line is then used to basically give them immunity in various countries.
Yeah. And
people use them like a state army, right? So, but the point is, like, the general trend for these mercenary forces is, their big spiel is, we don't have immunity.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah, and that's one of the solutions I've seen in terms of in the US context is requiring cops to carry insurance. Like, they have to pay for insurance, and maybe you might subsidize that insurance. But
why not? Lawyers already do.
Yeah, well, that's it. Lots of other professions require insurance, and the issue is that you give a subsidy maybe to cover the cost of basic insurance, but quite often what you find in these particularly dysfunctional situations is that it's a small number of cops that generate massive amounts of this brutality claims. So those individual cops would face much higher premiums as opposed to the guys who are actually doing the job properly and not bashing up all the citizens. So it's one aspect of, okay, getting rid of qualified immunity is difficult, but at least especially, in the case of the US, it's like a court-made doctrine. They just kind of pulled it out of their hat. And getting the legislature to change it would be almost impossible. And I suspect that's true here as well. But like requiring insurance. No, in the US it's not. It's from a particular. I listened to some podcasts recently that talked about this issue, and Free Thoughts podcast.
Yeah,
covered.
No, but I'm saying I think in Australia, I think it's from common law. Like, because it to me it seems too prevalent all throughout the Anglosphere to not be rooted in something that's come from common law or some form of parliamentary statute from Britain.
Well, yeah, sure. Yeah. So parliamentary statute, I think, is how it has come, because, of course, the state protects its own. That's the whole point. Like, so I suspect the common law wouldn't allow for it if it was, and in fact, it would be some sort of royal prerogative, or like it'd be based in something to do with the nature of the state. It's probably not based in any kind of common law reality.
Yeah,
because under the common law they would just be treated like anybody else. I would imagine. But nevertheless, So insurance is probably like a good first step to, like, requiring professional insurance to cover for this kind of stuff, because not only, firstly, it gets the taxpayer kind of a bit off the hook directly, but also it would change incentives so that cops have an incentive. Like, basically, it forces out bad cops, and that's without having to rely on the political process. So yeah. I think that's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, let insurance handle it. Well, yeah, insurance and competition. I think insurance and competition would handle most of it, because insurance is basically a way to deal with that risk element.
Yeah.
Because obviously, if you privatize it, you're going to have dodgy operators, right?
Yeah.
Well, you have dodgy operators even in the government context. It's just you can't do anything about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the point is, insurance is the element to guard against dodginess, and privatization and competition is to improve your quality.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, speaking of dodginess, supreme dodginess in terms of banking, we've got the People's Bank. Yay. Richard
the Green suggestion
had a speech at the National Press Club yesterday, so Wednesday, and he called for a People's Bank. And not only, that alone, really stupid, but where it really puts icing on the cake is he wants a People's Bank to make it easier to borrow money to buy a house. Because we haven't seen that shit elsewhere go completely horribly wrong.
I know. I'm sitting there going like, so to him, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac
Yeah, they're the
weren't
dream.
real banks. So effectively, this is stage one of how to create a GFC.
Yep.
I mean, it's interesting that he hasn't learnt history, but okay.
No, but you know, Vickers, the problem was corporate greed. That's what caused the GFC. It's got nothing to do with the government policy. It's got nothing to do with the fact that the US government forced banks to buy these to give dole out crappy loans and then subsidize them. No, it's all corporate greed.
Yeah. So, look, there are three problems. There are three immediately obvious problems, right?
That's a good way of putting it.
Yeah, I'm just
the
like
problems are endless. We need to.
Yeah, it's just like the problems are endless, but the three immediate ones that pop out to people are like, so you want to give people who can't possibly repay their loans money, right? And it's just like that's effectively slavery. That's effectively another name for it. And in case you don't think it is, they can't make enough money to pay the principal and interest. That's the type of people you're talking about. This is the ones they want to loan money to. Right? So, firstly, slavery. Secondly, it's going to increase the demand for housing, so people need to borrow more in order to get their house. So, all of a sudden, you pushed housing from being affordable.
Yeah.
And the third thing is obviously the moral hazard, right? You're creating an incentive structure there that basically encourages the greed that you're talking about, or predatory lending practices, as they like to call them.
Yeah. So, I mean, we see with the first homeowners grant is like the perfect example of like how you go to help. Because he specifically rules out anybody else who already owns a house can't access this People's Bank. But yeah, so it's pitched at first home buyers, and we already have a system for helping first home buyers, and it doesn't help at all because all it does is create a price floor for homes. You know, if you increase the first homeowners grant, well, then they're just going to jack up the prices to include that in the cost of housing, and this would operate in much the same way. Essentially, it's a massive win to the real estate industry because now you've got even more cheap funding for first home buyers, and you're just going to see property prices rise.
I was going to say, by the way, I do realize it's being massively hypocritical of two of us homeowners who are beneficiaries of the homeowners grant to basically say it's a piece of shit that doesn't actually help housing.
Well, no, but it doesn't help us. That's the thing. It doesn't help us. Like it
didn't help us.
No, because it just means that the cost of my house when I went to buy it was, I bought a pre-existing home. I didn't buy a new home. But essentially it just meant that it's a $7,000 gift to the previous homeowner. And to the guys before it.
So I did buy a brand new house or brand new apartment. So I got to capitalize on the maximum amount you could get on the full home, first home buyer grant. So you know what that meant? It meant my stamp duty was completely covered.
Yeah.
So I didn't pay stamp duty. The government effectively did. Yeah. So did it actually help me get into my house? Not really.
No.
It just meant I didn't pay stamp duty.
Yeah.
But then again, the question also becomes who technically pays stamp duty, and because it's a transaction tax, right? It's really a bit of both parties.
Sure. Okay. But I mean, nevertheless, it's not making it easy to buy a home, and that's the thing. So like, one of the issues that comes up with just housing in general is these are all, these are all sort of. Band-aids to cover up the fact that we have expensive housing, but the problem, none of it addresses the real cause of it, which is zoning, which is taxes, which is overregulation, all this kind of stuff. And I mean, the Greens are not certainly. I mean, they're the last party that would ever really talk about deregulating the housing market. And so, really, this is just another shitty policy on top of a massive pile of existing shitty policies that won't make housing cheaper. So I mean, it's just, but I mean, to be fair, I mean, this is like, nationalizing banks is not like a green specialty, so the article I'm reading, which is in the Guardian, makes the point which is something we've definitely brought up in this show before, which is that One Nation also likes nationalised banks, as does the Qatar's Australia Party. So, this is one of the instances where the left and the right end up mimicking each other in slightly different ways, because they all hate banks, which is just kind of stupid.
Yeah, but that's effectively where it comes from. It is an attempt to hate on the banks.
Yes.
Because the banks have all our money. That's what's happening here.
And they're greedy. Because you need to
and they're
understand.
greedy.
They're greedy.
But we see this. It seems to be an article of faith from the left, as far as I can tell, is that the banks are responsible for all the woes in our society. And I sit there going like, okay, let's pretend that they are, right? Why would a system where you take over the banks help?
Yes.
Right, and that's where I really want to get into it. It's just like, oh, well, we'll democratically hand the money to ourselves. I'm just like, so you're voting to give yourself more money, right? What if someone votes to give themselves more money and not to you?
Sure.
Right, and there are clear flaws in their logical plan. Sorry, there are clear logical flaws to their plan. And the thing is, they kind of just hand wring and wave it away. But ultimately, what they're talking about is creating a generation of wage slaves. Ultimately, that's what their aim is. Sorry, that's not what their aim is. Ultimately, that's what their result will be.
Sure. Yeah. So this is just the they're like, okay, the world is unfair. Let's intervene. Let's use the government to intervene to fix this thing, and then you need an intervention to help deal with the last intervention, and then you need another intervention. So it's just more of the same stuff. I mean, this is ultimately politics is a make-work program for politicians. They're always constantly coming up with the solutions that are there to solve the problems from their last solution, that the last solution caused. So, and then there's UBI. That was another thing which I don't think we will go into right now because we're just about the end. But he also wanted like a universal basic income, which is just set at the rate for pensioners for everybody. The amount of money that pensioners get, but for everybody. Pretty crazy. All right. Well, any final thoughts on Greens banking?
No, not really. It's just general silliness from the Greens, as far as I can tell. But to be perfectly honest, I kind of want to go into a little bit of a segue here and just go like, we've seen some pretty atrocious policies come from the left in general. With respect to taxing and banking in the last couple of months. And I can't help but feel that this is all as a result of like Turnbull's really lackluster performance in the polls. Right? And I think and I think that these are articles of faith for the left that they've been holding off on talking about for years and years and years. And I think that when they see Turnbull so weak, they think they can push maybe some of their more achievable agenda in the finance space.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, certainly the Banking Royal Commission opens the door to that. Because, I mean, really, Royal Commissions are the basis for future policy. And they're going to, like the ACTU is going to go in hard for People's Bank and blah, blah, like all these organizations are going to go in, Get Up, and the rest of it are all going to go in there and say, banks are evil. They're full of rich people who are evil. Rah, evil, evil, evil. And that creates the sort of the environment to, and that, I mean, let's also be real. It's not like people love banks, so that's why it's like oil companies. Like they're a rich target. That's why there's been like 40 different inquiries into the price of petrol, because whenever the price goes up, people want a villain, and oil companies make a convenient villain. And in in the case of financial instability, which is what we've had for the last 10 years, banks are a ripe target. I mean, they're always a ripe target. And I suspect the number of banking inquiries is substantial because every time you need, But
here's the thing, right? But here's the thing. All those things they're talking about, like People's Bank or, like a bank that really cares about its people, cares about who is investing in them, or rather, no, who are their customers, right? That's literally a building society. Right, I'm not even kidding. Building societies, credit unions, credit unions especially, right? Credit union, when you get a bank account, you are literally buying shares in that bank.
Yeah.
That's how the entire system works, right? And it's just like, and that's why credit unions and building societies have such low interest rates.
Yeah.
Like I'm not even kidding. Like I pay 3.58% now.
Wow, that's
Right.
all right.
No kidding, right? But I'm with a smaller bank, right?
Yeah.
I don't have like wealth packages or anything like that, right? And you know, I might have slightly more fees, but the fees are significant. Like the fees are tiny in comparison to the amount of interest saving I'm making.
So,
Right.
and the great irony is, after the GFC, when Rudd went into some, bail out, essentially, I mean, they didn't bail out the banks, but they essentially, put in government guarantees for the big four. Is it that it consolidated the market? That's the thing. Banking regulation, as it is right now, it has worked to eliminate credit unions, eliminate building societies. All the bigger, the big four,
Which is why they've merged into the big four.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's it. So that's the great irony, is that it's government intervention that led to the situation where you've got the Greens saying there's not enough competition. Well, you dickheads, stop being moronic about this. You can't have it both ways. I mean, they're trying to have it both ways. Like, they're essentially saying, well, we need more regulation, and then when the regulation does the exact opposite of what they intend, they're like, oh, we need more regulation. It's just...
Yeah. So
why can't you punch people so they can be logical? I just wish that you could, but then they'd start punching me.
So
In the hope
it's
that
just
we-
reminded me of this story. So So this is a story
We'll
of
finish on this funny story.
Yeah. So this is a story from like the back in the days of where socialists actually ran governments in India.
Yeah.
So you're talking about like the 1960s. And my dad basically told me, look, India had a large population, a lot of people starving, right? And there's like this pancake sort of dish called a dosa, right?
Yep.
So the government basically mandated that every person will have access to a dosa per day. Right.
Yep.
So what the people who made this stuff did is just go like, oh yeah, that's perfect. I'm just gonna, ramp up the rate. I'll just ramp up the rate. You're entitled to a dosa. I will have as many doses as available as possible, but I'm just going to charge more. Right. So then they mandated the price.
Yep.
Right. So what the guy did is, so what then they happened is the doses became smaller. Right. Then they mandated the size.
Yeah.
So what happened is the size stayed the same, but they made it kind of like a donut.
Yeah. Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
Then they mandated the size and thickness.
Yep.
Right? Of it. And then basically the place would run out of them by 9 o'clock. And to basically say like, okay, well, they're running out really early in the morning. We might as well, make sure that they, we're going to pay them to have all the materials to keep people, fed. Right? And that ended up costing them government, a lot of money. Eventually, they just gave up on the policy.
Yeah.
So that's effectively what's going on here, except with banking instead of food.
Yeah. No. Absolutely. It's every previous intervention requires more interventions to fix the problems that the previous intervention created. Because you can't. Essentially, politics is living in an unreality. That's what it means to sort of have a political system. It's like, we want to change how reality operates, so let's get politicians to try and force this thing to be the case. And you can't live in unreality. So anyway, that's it for Taking Liberties this week. Thanks everybody for joining us. Don't forget to check out our YouTube and our Facebook page, and we'll be back again next week.
See ya.